Hey guys, welcome to Bookish Islander. My name is Juan. I hope you're all doing very well. Today, I'm here to talk about my March TBR and also give you some suggestions for books to read this month. We are in March, and that means that a lot of people on BookTube do what they call March of the Mammoths. I am excited to participate for the first time. Now, my understanding of March of the Mammoths is that it is a month-long readathon of big books that takes place every year in March. And according to the rules, anything over 800 pages qualifies as a mammoth. March of the Mammoths is hosted by Jason and also Lukasz at Totally Pretentious and Alex at Beagle Books. But before I get into my TBR, I want to welcome all the new subscribers I've been getting lately and also thank everyone who likes my videos or leave comments every week. So whether you are a new subscriber or have been around now for some time, thank you. You guys truly make my day. Anyway, what I am here to do today is give you some suggestions for seriously big books that you can read if you'd like to participate in March of the Mammoths. And before the end of the video, I will also reveal which hefty tome will be the vein of my life this month. But let's begin with some options. So the first suggestion that I have is a novel in translation which is getting some buzz at the moment. The Eighth Life, which I have here, is a German novel written by the Georgian-born author Nino Haratishvili. This is a Spanish translation which I own, but the book also came out in English in 2019. So what is The Eighth Life about? I'm gonna put it down because it's really heavy. It is an epic novel and a family saga that spans decades. It is set in Tbilisi, which is the capital of Georgia, in Moscow, in London, in Berlin. The novel first came out in Germany in 2014, but we're going to hear a lot about it this year because its English translation by Charlotte and Ruth Martin has just been longlisted for this year's International Booker Prize. If you want to find out about all the other books longlisted for the International Booker, then I suggest you check out the reaction videos that Camille at Camille Reads and Eric at Lonesome Reader put out last week. Now, going back to the book, The Eighth Life has been likened to two other massive books, War and Peace by the Russian writer Leo Tolstoy and The Tin Drum by Günter Grass, the German writer. But I haven't read either one of those two novels yet, so I cannot tell you if the comparison is a fair one. I also haven't read The Eighth Life yet, but I think it is a strong contender for March of the Mammoths. Another long book that I've considered for this readathon is A Suitable Boy by the Indian writer Vikram Seth. A Suitable Boy was first published in 1993 and it is considered one of the longest novels ever published in English. Most editions of this novel in English are just shy of 1,500 pages. Now, as you can imagine, this novel has been on my radar for many years. I remember seeing it everywhere when I lived in England. So it must have been very popular in the UK. From what I know, A Suitable Boy tells the story of four independent families, four different families, but it mainly focuses on one of the characters' search for a suitable boy to marry her daughter off to. So I've seen A Suitable Boy compared to Middlemarch, which I have here, and I read last October for Victober. And in case you don't know what Victober is, it is another month-long readathon which takes place every year in October. The theme is, of course, Victorian books, be it plays, novels, essays, or any other genre. Now, some critics also compare A Suitable Boy to other Victorian novels such as Bleak House by Charles Dickens, Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray, or even to 18th century novels like Tom Jones by Henry Fielding or Clarissa by Samuel Richardson. I have to admit now that, talking about all these classic novels has put me in the mood to recommend a few classics. So, if you are more inclined to read classics, I have three great suggestions for you. First one is Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. What can I say about the first novel ever written? I mean, so much has been written and said about Don Quixote that it is difficult to talk about it. It is difficult to talk about it without making a fool out of myself. But anyway, so I'm going to talk about it from a strictly personal point of view. Like many people growing up in Spanish-speaking countries, I first encountered Don Quixote in high school. I'm going to put it down again because it's a heavy book. So yeah, I read it for the first time when I was in high school, and I remember that we weren't supposed to read the whole book. Instead, we had to buy an abridged version, which we then proceeded to read in class, and if memory serves, it took us a whole school year to get through the abridged version. I actually think it was a good idea to read an abridged version at the time. Years later, when I decided to tackle the whole book for the first time, yes, I have read Don Quixote, I was a lot less intimidated because I had read an abridged version. I cannot speak for reading Don Quixote in translation. It is, of course, widely available in any language you can imagine, but I have only read it in Spanish. Now, what I can say is that Spanish used is not easy, so you need to possess certain linguistic baggage before you can read it. And that's why I'm so thankful to my long-forgotten Spanish teacher in high school. When I say long forgotten, all I mean is that my memory is terrible, so I don't actually remember the names of anyone I met that long ago. Don Quixote has a deliciously playful structure, and I wonder, did Cervantes invent metafiction in the 17th century? I say that because reading Don Quixote sometimes feels like reading Paul Auster. Anyway, the book is also really funny, and again, being Hispanic, it's amazing to me how much I recognize myself in the text. And by recognizing myself in the text, I don't necessarily mean that I see myself in the character of Don Quixote or Sancho, but actually, I understand the book in a deep way, and I think all Hispanics do. And I just don't know if that is lost in translation, but I suspect that most people would get the novel if they made the effort. Now, do you want another supposedly highbrow suggestion that is actually surprisingly accessible? Then, how about the essays by Montaigne? This is one that most people will have to read in translation, I have to say that. Even French speakers, because Michel de Montaigne wrote this 107 essays in Middle French back in the late 17th, no, actually in the 16th century. And I believe that the essays were originally published in 3 separate novels, but all modern editions, at least the ones that I have encountered, come out in a single volume. I used to own a beautiful edition by Penguin Classics, but sadly I don't have it anymore. I've never read the whole book, nor did I read the essays in order. Montaigne wrote about almost every imaginable subject, so my approach to this book has always been to pick up an essay on a subject I was interested in at a time and then read it. I know that I read some of them several times. Let me give you just some of his titles so you can see the breadth of Montaigne's writing. So there's an essay entitled Of Idleness, another one of Liars, of Fear, of Pedantry, of Solitude, of Books, of Virtue. I think you get the idea, but my favorite essay in the whole collection, or at least the one that has stuck in, is the one entitled Of Friendship, which is simply stunning. So if you don't feel like reading this mammoth, at least read Of Friendship. Okay, so a moment ago, I said that one of the classic novels that A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth gets compared to is Clarissa by Samuel Richardson. Clarissa, or The History of a Young Lady, was originally published in England in 1748, and it is considered one of the longest novels in English. Perhaps that is why it has been likened to A Suitable Boy, I don't know. But what is Clarissa about? Basically, the protagonist, Clarissa Harlowe, who is a virtuous young woman, and I think here, virtuous is code for saying virgin. Anyway, Clarissa, falls victim to the villainous rake, Robert Lovelace. Now, I have tried to read Clarissa before, but I have never been successful in finishing it. I was a lot more successful, however, with Pamela by the same author, which has a similar plot, but it is also a lot shorter. Clarissa is considered a masterpiece, so I know that sooner or later I would try to read it again, but if you like the sound of it, why not read it in March? Okay, the last classic I have for you today is a lot more recent. In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust came out in 7 volumes originally between 1871 and 1922, so it is practically a contemporary novel, right? I read the first volume, which is entitled Swan's Way, many years ago. I was full of good intentions and wanted to read the other 6 volumes in close succession, but my good intentions went down the drain and I never picked it up again. I'd like to read the whole work, but it has been so long that I would have to start all over again. I've been toying with the idea actually of making that one of my reading projects for this year. I'm not sure if I'd be able to start in March, but anyway, I haven't told you what In Search of Lost Time is about, have I? So the book focuses on the narrator's recollections of his childhood into adulthood. That is why sometimes English language editions use the title Remembrance of Things Past, which makes perfect sense. The narrator comes from an aristocratic French background, and that was certainly not the background of the author Marcel Proust, but he's said to have been a little bit of a social climber, so he must have had some first-hand experience of that milieu, I guess. Well, I hope you find my suggestions useful. I might read or reread some of those books or any of those books in March, but the one that I know I will be reading is Ducks Newburyport by the American writer Lucy Ellmann. According to my Goodreads page, I started reading this chunkster in November last year. And yes, the novel is more than 1,000 pages, but if I truly focused on it, I would have finished it by now. So why is it taking me so long? Is this book boring? Is it difficult? Actually, not at all. In fact, I find it quite compelling since I first picked it up. The problem, and I'm going to put it down because it's heavy, the problem is that I've been erratic on my approach to it, I'll confess. Now, here's my problem. Because the novel is so big, I was afraid that if I focused solely on it, I wouldn't read anything else for a whole month or possibly longer. So I've been interrupting my reading of it while I also read other books. And that has worked to a certain extent because I have made progress on it and I've also been able to keep up with my other reading. However, there have been long stretches of time when I have neglected reading this stream of consciousness novel about a housewife from Ohio with a baking business as a side hustle. And I know that any description of the plot of this novel does it a disservice. As far as literary characters go, a housewife from the American Midwest may not be the most compelling character to spend so much time with. Or at least it doesn't sound like it would be, but this novel is a whole lot more than that. So I'm going to put it down again. So yeah, I'll have to finish it first. Let me finish it first, and then if everything goes according to plan, I'll be able to share my thoughts on Ducks Newburyport on my wrap-up this month, by the end of March, or maybe before. So, watch out if you care to know my opinion. And if you want to talk about any of the books that I discuss in this video, or if you want to let me know what book or books you plan to read for March of the Mammoths, that's what the comment section down below is for. I hope you have a great reading month, whatever you do and whatever you read. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you again very soon. Bye bye.